There is a financial instrument that every company on earth uses. It is called a share. The idea that you can divide ownership of a commercial enterprise into transferable units, that you can buy a fraction of a venture, sell that fraction to a stranger, and have the price of that fraction determined by what strangers are willing to pay for it. This idea was invented in this city, in this building, in the year 1602. Before Amsterdam, if you wanted to participate in a commercial voyage, you committed your capital and your risk simultaneously. If the ship sank, you lost everything. The exposure was total and personal. Amsterdam changed the question. Instead of asking how to eliminate risk, it asked how to distribute it. The answer was the share. Buy a fraction of many voyages instead of all of one. Sell your fraction if you need liquidity before the ship returns. Let the market, the continuous negotiation between buyers and sellers, determine what that fraction is worth in real time. This mechanism is now so fundamental to the organization of economic life that it is invisible, like grammar, like the alphabet, like the decimal system. You cannot see it because you cannot see without it. Every publicly traded company on earth, Apple, Toyota, Petrobras, Samsung, is a direct institutional descendant of a decision made in Amsterdam in 1602. The question this episode answers is not what Amsterdam invented. It is why Amsterdam, and not Venice, not Genoa, not London, not any of the other great commercial cities of the early modern world, was the place where the invention happened. The answer is not genius. It is desperation. Every city in this series has a mechanism. Amsterdam's mechanism is the most consequential in the series, not because it made Amsterdam powerful, but because it made the modern world. The mechanism is this: the separation of capital from risk through the instrument of the publicly tradable share, administered through a transparent market with continuous price discovery, governed by law rather than by relationship. Before this mechanism existed, large-scale commercial ventures required either a monarch's treasury, a merchant family's fortune, or a banking house's credit. Each of these had a ceiling. The monarch's treasury was finite. The merchant family's fortune was concentrated and illiquid. The banking house's credit was personal and non-transferable. The share had no ceiling, because it could be divided indefinitely and sold to anyone willing to buy it. The share could aggregate capital from thousands of small investors simultaneously, people who had never met the merchants organizing the voyage, who had no personal relationship with the venture, who were motivated purely by the calculation that the expected return exceeded the expected risk. This was new. Not the calculation. Merchants had always calculated risk. What was new was the instrument that made the calculation transferable, that let you sell your position to someone else's calculation, that let the market be wrong and then correct itself in real time. Amsterdam built this instrument because it had no alternative. A small republic at war with the largest empire in the world, dependent on trade for its survival, could not afford to let individual merchant families control the commercial networks that kept the country alive. It needed to pool capital at a scale that individual families could not provide. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, was not a corporation in the modern sense. It was a survival strategy dressed as a corporation. And in solving the problem of its own survival, it invented the architecture that the entire modern economy still runs on. Amsterdam is built on a swamp, not metaphorically. The city rests on approximately 11 million wooden piles driven into the peat and clay of the IJ River Delta. The Royal Palace on Dam Square, the largest secular building in the 17th century world, stands on 13,659 of them. The piles have been there since the 17th century. They have not rotted because they are permanently submerged in waterlogged soil from which oxygen is absent. Remove the water and they rot within years. The city requires continuous management of its own foundations just to remain standing. This is not a disadvantage. It is the origin of everything. A country that must engineer its own land, that must build and maintain the dikes, pumps, polders, and drainage systems that make habitation possible, develops an institutional culture of collective management that has no parallel in the history of governance. The Dutch waterschappen, water boards, are the oldest democratic institutions in the world, predating the national government by centuries. Every farmer whose land might flood has a vote in how the water is managed. The water does not recognize the authority of kings. The geography also gave Amsterdam something more immediately useful: position. The city sits at the mouth of the IJ, connected to the Rhine and Meuse river systems that drain the interior of northern Europe, open to the North Sea and through it to the Atlantic. Grain from the Baltic, timber from Scandinavia, textiles from England, spices from Asia, all of these trade routes converged on the same delta. Amsterdam did not create this geography, but it understood, earlier than any of its competitors, that the geography was worth nothing without the institutional infrastructure to exploit it. The canals that make the city beautiful were not built for beauty. They were built for cargo. Every canal house with its pulley hook above the attic window was a warehouse with a street address. The city was a storage and distribution system that happened to be inhabited. The question was never whether Amsterdam would become a trading city. The question was what kind of trading city it would allow itself to become. The city that invented modern capitalism was built by refugees. In 1576, Spanish troops sacked Antwerp, then the commercial capital of Northern Europe, the city through which the wealth of the Habsburg Empire flowed. In 3 days of organized violence, that killed 8,000 people and destroyed a third of the city's buildings. The Spanish Fury, as it was called, was not a military accident. It was a consequence of the Spanish crown's failure to pay its troops, and of the decision to let them compensate themselves from the population they were supposed to govern. The merchants of Antwerp did not wait to find out if it would happen again. They left. They took their capital, their networks, their expertise in commodity trading, their knowledge of Baltic grain markets and Levantine spice routes and English wool prices, and they moved north, into the Dutch Republic that was still fighting Spain for its independence. Amsterdam in 1580 had a population of roughly 30,000 people. By 1600, it had 60,000. By 1650, it had 200,000, making it one of the largest cities in Europe, built almost entirely from immigration in 2 generations. The immigrants brought something more valuable than money. They brought the institutional knowledge of how a commercial city works, how to price risk, how to organize credit, how to create the legal infrastructure that makes contracts enforceable between strangers. A merchant named Isaac Lemaire arrived from Antwerp in the 1580s, became one of the original shareholders of the VOC in 1602, was expelled from the company for fraud in 1605, and then, in 1609, organized the world's first coordinated short-selling attack on VOC shares to profit from its decline. He was simultaneously a founding contributor to the instrument that would define the modern economy and the first person to weaponize it against itself. Amsterdam generated both the innovation and its exploitation within a single decade. That is not a contradiction. It is the mechanism. On March 20, 1602, the States General of the Dutch Republic granted a charter to the Verenigd Oost-Indisch Company, the United East India Company, giving it a monopoly on Dutch trade east of the Cape of Good Hope and west of the Strait of Magellan for 21 years. The charter included a provision that had never appeared in a commercial document before. Investors could not withdraw their capital for the duration of the charter. This was the problem the VOC's founders had to solve. Asian trade voyages took 2 to 3 years. No investor would commit capital for that long without the ability to exit if circumstances changed. But the company needed stable capital to build the infrastructure, the ships, the fortifications, the warehouses, the local relationships that would make the voyages profitable. The solution was the secondary market. If you cannot get your money back from the company, you can sell your share to someone else. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the Beurs, established in 1611, was built specifically to provide this secondary market. It was not an idea that emerged organically from trading practice. It was engineered infrastructure, built to solve a specific problem created by the VOC's charter. The Beurs was open to anyone with capital, not just established merchants, not just members of guilds or families or faiths, anyone. A Portuguese Jewish refugee named Joseph de la Vega wrote the first book ever published about stock market behavior, Confusion to Confusions, in Amsterdam in 1688. The Beurs was open to anyone with capital, not just established merchants, not just members of guilds or families or faiths, anyone. A Portuguese Jewish refugee named Joseph de la Vega wrote the first book ever published about stock market behavior, Confusion to Confusions, in Amsterdam in 1688. He described the market's participants with the precision of someone who had watched it destroy and create fortunes. Simultaneously, the bulls, the bears, the speculators, the rumor mongers, the short sellers. He also described, with extraordinary clarity, the mechanism that made the market addictive and dangerous in equal measure. The price of a share was not determined by the value of the underlying asset. It was determined by what buyers and sellers believed other buyers and sellers believed about that value. The market was not a measurement instrument. It was a collective hallucination with real consequences. De la Vega understood this in 1688. It took the rest of the world 300 years to agree with him, after enough crashes to make the argument unavoidable. The market was not a measurement instrument. It was a collective hallucination with real consequences. De la Vega understood this in 1688. It took the rest of the world 300 years to agree with him, after enough crashes to make the argument unavoidable. The mechanism that Amsterdam invented was not neutral. The VOC's share price rose because the VOC controlled its supply chains with violence. The nutmeg monopoly, the control of the Banda Island's entire output of the spice that was, in the 17th century, worth more by weight than gold, was maintained by Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the VOC's Governor General, through the near extermination of the Bandanese population between 1609 and 1621. The indigenous population of the Banda Islands before Dutch contact was approximately 15,000 people. After Cohen's campaigns, it was estimated at 1,000. The survivors were enslaved to work the nutmeg plantations under VOC ownership. The shareholders in Amsterdam received their dividends. The connection between these two facts was not invisible at the time. It was simply organized out of moral responsibility by the structure of the instrument itself. A shareholder in Amsterdam who had never been to Asia, who had no knowledge of what Cohen was doing on the other side of the world, who had simply bought a piece of paper that entitled them to a fraction of the company's profits. This person bore no legal responsibility for how those profits were generated. The separation of capital from risk that made the share revolutionary also separated capital from accountability. This was not an accident. It was encoded in the instrument's design. The same feature that made investment accessible to small savers, the transferability, the anonymity, the legal separation between the investor and the enterprise, also made it impossible to trace moral responsibility from the dividend back to the act that generated it. Amsterdam built this. Amsterdam also built, in the same generation, the Spinoza who argued that God and nature were identical and that human freedom required the rejection of superstition, including, by implication, the superstition that commerce was morally innocent. Amsterdam built this. Amsterdam also built, in the same generation, the Spinoza who argued that God and nature were identical and that human freedom required the rejection of superstition, including, by implication, the superstition that commerce was morally innocent. Baruch Spinoza was the son of Portuguese Jewish refugees. He was excommunicated by the Amsterdam Jewish community in 1656, at the age of 23, for reasons the community never specified in writing. He spent the rest of his life grinding lenses and writing philosophy in a series of rented rooms in Dutch cities. He published almost nothing in his lifetime. His Ethics, published posthumously in 1677, is one of the foundational texts of Western rationalism. The city that built the most consequential financial instrument in history also produced the philosopher who spent his life asking whether the pursuit of self-interest was compatible with the pursuit of truth. He died at 44 of lung disease, possibly aggravated by glass dust. The VOC paid its largest dividend that year, 40% of the share's face value. In 1637, a single bulb of the Semper Augustus tulip, a striped variety whose coloring was caused by a virus the Dutch did not know existed, sold for the price of a canal house on the Herengracht. The tulip mania of 1636 to 1637 is the world's first documented speculative bubble. It followed with almost mechanical precision the same pattern that every subsequent bubble has followed. An asset with genuine scarcity value attracts investment. Rising prices attract more investors motivated by the rising prices rather than the underlying value. The market becomes a bet on what other people will pay rather than what the asset is worth. And then at the moment when the last buyer has entered and there is no one left to sell to, the price collapse. The collapse happened in February 1637. Contracts for tulip bulbs to be delivered in the spring became worthless overnight. The Dutch courts refused to enforce futures contracts for tulips, ruling them gambling debts rather than commercial obligations. The mechanism that had been built to distribute risk had distributed it so widely that when it failed across an entire society simultaneously. A cloth merchant named Floris van Berchem had signed contracts for tulip bulbs worth 10 times his annual income. He could not honor them. His creditors could not collect. The contracts cascaded through a network of obligations that the market's transparency had made invisible. Everyone knew the price. No one knew the exposure. The tulip mania did not destroy Amsterdam. Amsterdam was too institutionally sophisticated, too diversified, too deeply integrated into the real trade networks of the Baltic and the Indies to be destroyed by a speculative bubble in flower bulbs. What it did do was demonstrate, for the first time in recorded history, that the mechanism Amsterdam had built was capable of generating crises that no individual actor had intended and no individual actor could prevent. The market was not a machine for producing rational outcomes. It was a machine for aggregating collective irrationality at a speed and scale that pre-market economies could not have achieved. Amsterdam understood this by 1637. It continued building the market anyway, because the alternative, returning to the world where capital was concentrated in family fortunes and royal treasuries, was worse. Rembrandt van Rijn went bankrupt in 1656. He had bought his house on the Jodenbriestraat in 1639 for 13,000 guilders, an enormous sum, roughly 20 times the annual income of a skilled craftsman, and had spent 17 years failing to pay the mortgage while spending his remaining income on art, antiquities, weapons, and curiosities that he used as props and references. The Amsterdam Insolvency Court inventoried his possessions in 1656. The list runs to several pages. Hundreds of paintings, prints, and drawings by himself and others, suits of armor, helmets, Japanese objects, stuffed animals. A walking stick formerly belonging to Hercules Seegers. He lost the house. He lost the inventory. He died in 1669 in a rented room, survived by one of his children. His painting Night Watch, completed in 1642 for the Amsterdam Civic Guard, now hangs in the Rijksmuseum and is among the most visited paintings in the world. Its most recent conservation and restoration project cost millions of euros and was live-streamed to global audiences. Rembrandt's lifetime earnings from the painting, 1,600 guilders. A woman named Hendrikke Stoffels was Rembrandt's housekeeper, companion and model for the last 15 years of his life. She was not his wife. His marriage to Saskia van Eilenberg had given him access to her estate, which he had spent, and the terms of that estate prevented him from remarrying without forfeiting the remainder. The Amsterdam Reformed Church summoned Hendrikke in 1654 to account for living in sin with Rembrandt. She appeared before the council while visibly pregnant with his child. The council admonished her. She continued living with Rembrandt. She died in 1663, 6 years before him. She appears in at least a dozen of his paintings, as Bathsheba, as a woman bathing in domestic scenes whose psychological intimacy has no equivalent in 17th century European painting. She has no Wikipedia page in most languages. The mechanism that made Amsterdam the richest city in the world created the conditions in which a painter of Rembrandt's capacity went bankrupt. A woman of Hendrikke's presence was invisible to history, and the VOC paid 40% dividends to investors who had never seen Asia. The Dutch Golden Age lasted approximately 1 century, from the founding of the VOC in 1602 to the death of William III of Orange in 1702, when the Dutch Republic began its long decline from commercial dominance. In that century, Amsterdam produced Rembrandt, Vermeer, Frans Hals, Jan Steen, and approximately 1.5 million paintings by artists, whose names have not survived, an industrial output of visual art, driven by a bourgeois market that for the first time in European history included middle-class buyers who wanted pictures for their homes rather than altarpieces for their churches. The art market the Dutch invented was like the stock market they invented, a mechanism for price discovery in an asset whose value was determined by collective belief rather than intrinsic worth. A painting by a fashionable Amsterdam master and a tulip bulb of a fashionable variety are the same economic object. Their price is a function of what buyers believe other buyers will pay. The Dutch understood this and painted pictures of tulips in vases and included hourglasses and skulls in the arrangements. The Vanitas tradition, the artistic meditation on the transience of wealth and beauty, was produced by the same civilization that was simultaneously building the mechanisms of wealth accumulation that would define the next 3 centuries. The Calvinism that had justified the Dutch revolt against Catholic Spain was also the theological tradition that insisted most explicitly on the moral ambiguity of commercial success. Prosperity as neither proof of virtue nor guarantee of salvation. The merchant's profits as legitimate but morally unremarkable. The soul's fate undetermined by the account books. The Dutch were not hypocrites. They were clear-eyed. They saw the mechanism for what it was: amoral, powerful, generative of both wealth and catastrophe. And they built museums to contemplate its products while continuing to operate it. The reorganization after the tulip crash of 1637 was not a reform of the mechanism. It was a refinement of it. Futures contracts were regulated. Bankruptcy law was clarified. The secondary market for shares became more liquid, more transparent, more accessible. The mechanism was not questioned. It was improved. In 1688, William of Orange invaded England with a Dutch army and became King William III. He brought Dutch bankers with him. Within 6 years, England had the Bank of England, modeled directly on the Amsterdam Exchange Bank, which had been operating since 1609. Within a generation, London had a stock market operating on the Amsterdam model, a national debt managed on the Amsterdam model, and a financial system capable of funding wars and commercial ventures at a scale that no previous English institution had achieved. The mechanism Amsterdam had built to survive its war with Spain was now powering the British Empire. The irony was precise. The Dutch had invented the instrument, used it to build a commercial empire, and then watched the English use the same instrument to build a larger one, funded partly by Dutch capital that had migrated to London when Amsterdam's political stability began to erode. A merchant banker named Francis Baring, of a family that had started in Bremen, established itself in London, and become the most powerful private bank in England, said in 1803 that Barings was the sixth great power in Europe, after Britain, France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. He was not boasting. He was describing how the Amsterdam mechanism, transplanted to London, had created an institution whose credit was more reliable than most sovereign states. The mechanism crossed the Atlantic in 1792, when 24 brokers signed the Buttonwood Agreement under a tree on Wall Street, establishing the rules for trading securities in New York. By 1900, Wall Street had absorbed the Amsterdam model, scaled it by a factor of 10, and was in the process of becoming the world's dominant financial center. By 2000, the mechanism that had been invented in a single building on the Cloveniersburgel in 1602 was running simultaneously in 150 countries, governing the allocation of approximately $100 trillion in publicly traded assets. Amsterdam's population in 2000, 730,000 people. The mechanism's reach, every economy on Earth. The proportion between the city that built it and the world it built is the most extreme ratio in the series. Amsterdam is currently the fifth largest financial center in Europe and the headquarters of some of the world's largest multinational corporations: Shell, Heineken, ASML, Philips, Booking.com. ASML is worth noting. The company, headquartered in Eindhoven but listed on the Amsterdam Exchange, manufactures the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that are the only technology capable of producing the most advanced semiconductor chips. There are approximately 200 of these machines operating in the world. Each one costs approximately $150 million. Without them, the chips in every advanced smartphone, iServer, and military system cannot be produced. ASML has a monopoly on this technology that is more complete than the VOC's monopoly on nutmeg was in 1621. The Dutch, 4 centuries after inventing the mechanism of commercial monopoly, are operating the most strategically significant industrial monopoly in the contemporary world, one that has made the Netherlands a central player in the US-China semiconductor trade war, and that has led the Dutch government to restrict ASML sales to China under American pressure. The geography has changed. The chips travel by air, not ship. The strategic logic, control a choke point in the supply chain of something everyone needs, is identical to 1602. The tolerance policy that Amsterdam developed in the 17th century, the Gettigen, the official willingness to permit what the law technically prohibited, in exchange for order and tax revenue, produced the coffee shops, the red light district, and the relatively liberal drug policies that made Amsterdam a global destination for a specific kind of tourism. It also produced in the 17th century the refuge for Descartes, Spinoza, Locke, and a generation of philosophers who could publish in Amsterdam what no other European city would permit. The mechanism of tolerance is the same. Regulate what you cannot prohibit and extract value from what you regulate. The philosopher and the cannabis tourist are, in the Amsterdam model, the same category of visitor, someone who came to do something their own society would not allow, in a city that decided the revenue from permission was worth more than the moral satisfaction of prohibition. Amsterdam built something in 1602 that it did not fully understand. The VOC's founders understood that they needed to pool capital at a scale that individual merchant families could not provide. They understood that the secondary market, the ability to sell your share before the venture completed, was the key to attracting the small investors who would provide that capital. They understood that a transparent, legal, publicly accessible market for shares would produce more liquidity than a private network of relationships. What they did not understand, what no one understood until the tulip crash of 1637, and not fully until the financial crises of the 20th century, was that the mechanism they had built was not a tool. It was an organism. It had its own logic, its own imperatives, its own capacity to generate outcomes that no individual actor intended and no individual actor could prevent. The market was not a device for producing rational allocations of capital. It was a device for aggregating collective beliefs about the future and then converting those beliefs with enormous speed and leverage into present reality. Every stock market crash in history to 1637, 1720, 1929, 1987, 2000, 2008 has followed the same pattern that Amsterdam produced in the tulip mania. Collective belief inflating the price of an asset beyond any relationship to its underlying value, followed by the moment when the last buyer has entered and there is no one left to sell to. Every regulatory framework designed to prevent the next crash, the circuit breakers, the disclosure requirements, the capital adequacy ratios, the stress tests, has been designed in response to a crash that has already happened, using rules that the next crash will find a way around. The mechanism is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. It pools capital from millions of people who have no relationship with each other and no knowledge of what their capital is financing, allocates it toward ventures that collective belief considers likely to be profitable, generates both the innovations that raise living standards and the crashes that periodically destroy them, and continues operating through every crisis because the alternative, returning to a world where capital is controlled by monarchs and merchant families, is worse. Amsterdam built this in a swamp, fighting for its survival in 1602. The city is small, the mechanism is the world, and the canal houses still lean slightly forward over the water, their hooks still in place above the attic windows, ready to lower the next cargo without hitting the building below.